friends, good afternoon to all who are attending. Welcome. We're very happy that you could join us at this CSIR at 75 conference. This is our 7th installment at the CSIR. You are attending a session on the C4IR South Africa webinar on the landscape and best practices in data policy to unlock 4IR opportunities for socio-economic development in South Africa. And our focus today is actually around enabling the digital citizens. My name is Khungeka Njobe. I'm the program manager, I'm the program director for this session, and I will be also providing an introduction as to why we're here, share with you the objectives. It is a different platform, those of you who attended the workshop last week, in that we are not, except for speakers, many of you are participating on the conference platform, and that platform doesn't enable for you to put up your hand and ask questions verbally. However, we encourage you to type in your questions. There's a process we have where I'll be able to receive the questions and then be able to read them out. And then if the questions are directed to the C4IR South Africa team, then we'll answer them. And if they are directed to the panelists, they'll also answer them. We have very, very little time, and therefore I just want to get started by introducing the session, and the first part of the session is around sharing with you what the objective of this event is, and then after that, then we'll get on with the agenda. Basically, we had started the journey within South Africa, the C4IR South Africa, at the workshop on the 2nd of November, which was last week actually, where we had decided to start this topic because, amongst other things, this is a topic that is cross-cutting in all the areas of 4IR that the center is choosing to focus on. So that's the reason why one of the reasons why we're having a focus on data policy in this webinar. The second reason is that the data is becoming increasingly valuable commodity in the current digital or fourth industrial revolution, globally, continentally, and nationally. The conversation around data is everywhere. We have it here in South Africa. When we sit on international platforms, it's there. When we sit in the continental structures, it's there. We also thought we should have this session to share information from diverse sources, including publicly available personal and business confidential, because publicly available personal and business confidential data is increasingly important when requiring data for public good, for service delivery, and for economic activity. I think many, many countries experience this issue around sharing of information during the COVID pandemic, and therefore this highlighted the need to deal with the gaps in data policy. It is critical that an overarching data policy is developed to govern the sharing, use, and its protection. And in South Africa, there are several initiatives underway. However, we cannot deny the fact that the landscape for creating data policy framework is very, very complex and includes many government entities and other standard-setting organizations. So, even though it's desirable to have one policy framework, it is unlikely to work like that, and there are many players that have to play a role. So your contribution today adds to something in beginning to address the complexity in data policy and unlocking the opportunities that come with 4IR. So this C4IR South Africa Initiative on Data Policy, I want to emphasize that we are not trying to duplicate. We are recognizing and acknowledge the initiatives that are currently underway on globally on data policy, continentally, and more importantly, nationally. And we are, as part of this journey, this discourse, this conversation, engaging with the relevant parties, and we will obviously play a role where we think we're best suited to play a role. Just in terms of our objectives today, this webinar will reflect on the potential for developing data policy standards through public-private collaboration. I think that's the critical aspect of this platform, the C4IR South Africa Center. It's about public and private sector coming together and collaborating. And specifically today, we wanted to look at empowering the digital citizen and close the digital divide. This was one of the areas that came up at the workshop we held last week. And we just thought this is an issue that is probably top of mind for everyone. And today, because of the short of time and recognizing that we still have a journey to go, we thought, can we engage a little bit more on this particular aspect? So specifically, the objectives of the seminar, of this webinar, are to gather input on the multi-stakeholder issues around data policy and the balance between privacy and empowerment. Second is to discuss the opportunities data policy presents for closing the digital divide and empowering digital citizens. I think this is a really important focus that we can discuss about today. And then at the end of this webinar, we will share the next steps for the center in terms of this particular initiative, but also overall in terms of its other activities. So, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed stakeholders, friends, colleagues, welcome to this webinar. We're looking forward to having a conversation with yourselves. And at this point in time, let me not hesitate to invite our next speaker. I have decided to put up front Ms. Crystal Khungeka, who's the Managing Director of C4IR Rwanda. By the way, in Africa, there's only two members of the global network on C4IR, and that is Rwanda and South Africa. So we thank you very much, Crystal, and welcome, and we're looking forward to hearing from you, and we're so chuffed that we're able to join us. And I'm sure there'll be more collaboration. Crystal, you've got the floor.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for the kind introduction, and very hearty thank you to Khungeka and all of the colleagues at the C4IR South Africa for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. I'm particularly excited to engage in this conversation with our sister center, given that we have only 2 centers in the network in Africa, and I think that it's really upon us to play a key leadership role in scaling our learnings and our impact at a continental level. So perhaps I can start with giving just a brief background of the C4IR Rwanda and where we are today. We are in our first year of operation, so it's very much still in startup mode. But as a country, Rwanda has decided to focus the C4IR's work in 2 primary areas. One is artificial intelligence, and the other is data policy, much like the C4IR South Africa. So we've spent the last several months doing a detailed mapping of Rwanda's AI landscape, as well as the policy and the regulatory environment that is required for us to, support and accelerate our ambitions as a country. And what became, very clear early on, is that before we can even talk about harnessing the potential of AI and other data-intensive technologies of the 4th Industrial Revolution, we must first enable the free flow of data, and of course, keeping in mind the appropriate backstops that need to be in place to protect the privacy and the security of our citizens. And so after a series of consultations with colleagues at the World Economic Forum, within government, the private sector, academia, we've decided to focus our first year on the broad topic of cross-border data flows, and really for four main reasons. Obviously, I think this is an informed audience, so I think we can all agree that data and cloud services are really fundamental infrastructure for driving the fourth industrial revolution. Secondly, the ability to move, store, and process data across borders, these are really necessary conditions in order to engage fully in the global data economy. And data localization requirements really can stifle innovation and economic growth. And I think this is particularly true for small economies, such as Rwanda. But it's also true, I think, globally when you look at, startups and SMEs. As a country, we've been trying to position ourselves as a proof of concept hub for technology innovation and attract investment. And we've also, recognized that the private sector needs that regulatory certainty to be able to invest and scale their businesses. So that's really kind of the story behind, why we've decided to prioritize cross-border data flows. So, as we were launching the center and trying to determine the project scope, the World Economic Forum had a very timely launch on the roadmap for cross-border data flows, which highlights best practices from around the world and varying perspectives on how countries are approaching this critical issue on cross-border data flows. So we adopted this framework as a tool for charting our own path. In Rwanda, being mindful that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. And as a country, we have to, look at our unique priorities, challenges, and opportunities that, that we must consider in shaping our own, legal and regulatory landscape. I see that we have colleagues from the forum on the call today, Anne Flanagan, who was a co-author to the roadmap, as well as Julie, who's on the data policy team. They've both been incredible resources in shaping our thinking and also connecting us to, the right partners. I did want to highlight, one such partner, the Bahrain Economic Development Board, which was also a co-author to the roadmap. And they've been really extremely useful in helping us shape our thinking, but also sharing their own journey of transformation and how they were able to achieve a more progressive, governance approach for cloud-enabled service delivery. I also wanted to highlight, last month we signed an agreement with a firm called Covington and Burling. And this is one of the leading firms in the world with deep expertise, particularly around technology, law, and public policy. And so they've been providing advisory services to the center, and particularly, with our current work on Rwanda's draft data privacy, able to help us convene a really powerful group of global and regional technology and financial services firms to really validate our thinking and our approach to the draft legislation. And so obviously we'll continue to work closely with them, with the Ministry of ICT and Innovation and the relevant regulatory authorities to ensure that we have an instrument that is innovation and investment friendly. So in terms of possible project outputs, because we're still refining the scope of our project, so this is, I'm sharing this amongst friends and, it's preliminary ideas. But this, I just wanted to share our current direction because I do think that there are opportunities for us to collaborate. So as we are refining the scope and we continue to identify, possible partners to bring into our project community, we need to get consensus around how to prioritize our activities, how to sequence them. But there are some activities that I wanted to share initially. I've already mentioned the draft legislation that we're working on for data privacy and protection. We are also working on the national AI policy with the government as well as GIZ. And we also anticipate that with the outcome of the draft legislation, we'll also be supporting the development of sector-specific regulations, existing ones and those that will need to be put in place to really make sure that there is alignment to the law and we have a really comprehensive governance framework. And then lastly, we'll be looking at pilots that will allow us to demonstrate the value of unlocking cross-border data flows with an initial focus on health and financial services sectors. So, you know, we really welcome the opportunity to collaborate with the C4IR. As I mentioned, you know, we're still shaping our project and building community. And I think that the C4IR South Africa is at, you know, kind of a similar stage in project development. But, you know, given that both of our centers have a strong focus on data policy, there are certainly lessons to be shared and an opportunity, I think, to scale those learnings at a continental level. So I really look forward to learning more about what the C4IR South Africa is doing, what you have underway, and how we can support and amplify your impact. So I think with that, I'll pause. I don't know if we have any time for questions, but really I'm very happy to be here and learn from the group that's here and see how we can also incorporate that into our thinking. Thank you very much.
So for sharing, you know, the work that you're doing at the center. I think one of the things I like about being part of this network is also the global support that one gets to shape ideas. And I think we as South Africa and Rwanda, we have no choice but to work together. And particularly on this particular topic on cross-border data policy. I think the African Union probably needs us to support them and to assist them and to provide insights. And that work can be done by just one of us. So be assured that we'll be definitely be on the call and create a platform for that collaboration to happen. And by the way, congratulations as Rwanda on always being on top of, ahead of many of us in the African continent. I'm trying to make South Africans jealous, by the way.
we also have a lot to learn from you.
Thank you very much for that. Crystal, the question, there isn't we are unable to take live questions, but questions may be written. And if you already left by the time those questions come to my desk to pose, we'll make sure that we email them to you so that whoever has asked them, you have an opportunity to answer them. It's a slightly different platform we have here for this conference today, so it's not allowing live interaction, but absolutely grateful that you are able to join us, and thank you very much. We now move on, again, being mindful of the very short time we have, to our third agenda item, which is about empowering digital citizens, and we will be getting insights from the World Economic Forum's Technology Governance platform on data policy. And Ms. Anne Flanagan will be talking to that topic, and her role is being a project lead for data policy at the Center for Fourth Industrial Revolution within the World Economic Forum. And you've got the floor. Looking forward to your sharing. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to be here. I'm Anne Flanagan, project lead on data policy based out of the World Economic Forum's Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. We're headquartered in San Francisco, and we were established in 2017 with a special mandate to look at the technology governance gap. So as well as teams working on data policy, we have teams that look at blockchain, at IoT, and at artificial intelligence. And I think you can already tell that we're really looking at policy around cutting edge technology. Now, why do we talk about the technology policy governance gap? Technology is moving so quickly, as we know, at an exponential rate. And this is really brought to the fore in issues such as data policy and governance, as already mentioned today. And COVID-19, I really agree that COVID-19 has forced the conversation around what does good data policy look like. So as we all know, governments have really struggled to keep up with how to govern data policy, how to make sure that proprietary data is protected, that people as individuals have their data protected, respected, privacy, etc., etc. And at the same time, we continue to need good accessibility and good availability of data to empower and to fuel innovation in the fourth industrial revolution. And as we can see, data is now coming from everywhere. We also have ambient data collection. We can walk down the street, a CCTV camera can take our image. We could be in a smart city environment. You could be in a room, a temperature sensor that could be now connected to the internet. The data is really coming from everywhere. That includes industrial data, that includes traditional statistic sets, you name it, it is absolutely everywhere. And it is growing at an exponential rate. So as the platform for public-private cooperation, we tried to take a more holistic view around data policy. So traditionally, we've seen governments put in place data protection laws. That's a really good thing, and I know South Africa is certainly part of that global landscape. There are differentiations between these laws, and because these laws tend to focus on data protection or are accompanied by complementary laws around intellectual property, for example, there's really a lot of focus on protecting, less of a focus on enabling. Now, enabling is a very, very challenging space. And one of my colleagues in the centre is working on a project right now called the Data for Common Purpose Initiative, which is the idea that we need more granular data policy and governance when it comes to specific uses of data. Because as you can agree, looking at data, for example, you need access to data for cancer research, that throws up a very different set of issues than if you're looking at how do we increase efficiency around energy management, or how do we get access to data for the development of artificial intelligence, for example. So it is, as mentioned, an incredibly complex space. And what we try to do is bring together different stakeholders from government, academia, civil society, and of course, businesses of all sizes to try to take a look at these issues. So what have we been looking at so far? We started off looking at the data protection and privacy space. And I think this is something that we can all relate to. We go online, we check a box, we hand over our information, but we're very unclear as to what happens next. Now, legally, that might actually be completely fine. The company might be completely on the right side of the law, but I think we as people can feel a little bit in the dark as to what happens. Sometimes our data can be used for consequences that maybe we didn't anticipate. Sometimes, in fairness to companies, that data has a secondary and a tertiary use that was never envisaged in the first place. So, for example, the COVID-19 crisis really highlighted how even the movement of people, the fact that people are working from home more, all of this information that would be really useful to our governments for decision making, and actually really useful for companies to make better decisions on how to provide goods and services to us, that is not necessarily available when you have data protection laws in place. So how do we strike that balance? So we looked firstly at this idea of notice and consent, that you hand over your data, you consent to handing it over. We collaborated with the Stanford University Center for Internet and Society in California, and we've been able to work with them over the past year and a half around what are the other ways that we can solve this problem. Why do we want to do this? As mentioned today, we want to empower citizens, give people better control of their data, and also derive better outcomes for society. And we are now moving into a new body of work where we're looking at how you could have maybe a third-party organization or a piece of technology that can help to bridge that gap. Because right now, the scale and the ubiquity of data collection is so much more vast than when these norms were set maybe 20 years ago. So that's one aspect that we're looking at. Crystal mentioned another area that we're looking at, which is around how do we enable the flow and the movement of data. And she spoke about cross-border data flows. What was really interesting about that body of work was we understood that through our research, the key to successful data movement is ultimately around building trust. And you can build trust by making sure that your processes are up to a certain standard, that cybersecurity is recognized, data protection is put to the fore, and government really has a role to play here as well in terms of being very explicit and clear with companies about what can you do. So we see a gap there as well, in the sense that we've lots of laws around what you cannot do. Sometimes it's less clear around what you can do, particularly when you're dealing with cutting edge technologies, where it's very difficult to anticipate what the uses might be when laws are made in the first instance. So as we move forward through our body of work, in terms of empowering people, we are now collaborating with the government of Finland, and we're piloting a project in the city of Helsinki next year, where we want to take a human-centered view of data policy. So that is, how do we put people first, and how do we do so in a way that enables greater public-private collaboration around data sharing? So this is a flavor of just some of the topics that we're looking at, but I think you can see that we're really trying to achieve, I don't know that we'll ever achieve a balance, but really trying to take into account all of the different multi-stakeholder views and think a little bit outside of the box, regardless of jurisdiction or use case, around what better data policy and governance looks like. So thank you so much for this opportunity today. Really happy to take any questions later on. And if anybody is interested in those specific projects, they're all available on our website. Thank you.
Look, this work on data policy and addressing data policy is hugely complex, but there is none that affects individual citizens as this particular topic you're addressing today. And I think that if globally, nationally, and continentally we begin to address these issues around how me as an individual is empowered around being a digital citizen, but also how am I protected? How do you ensure that I'm respected in the process? You know, that there's proper consent and tools like that in our regulatory system. These are incredibly important. And in South Africa, please be assured that we'll definitely be engaging with you guys already. We're having quite an active engagement with Julie and team, and it's good to have you on board as well to share with us today. And definitely we'll be following up as we tackle some of these topical issues. We thank you, Anne. Thank you, colleagues. That takes us now to our next item. We're running slightly late, which is a summary of the C4IR South Africa Data Policy Workshop we held last week. And I'm going to ask Professor Fulufhelo Nelwamondo to address us, just to give us a snippet of, in summary, what came out of that workshop. What are the key issues that came out of that workshop? And this is important as we consolidate moving forward and in order to begin to say, how do we take this initiative forward? So, Fulufhelo, you've got the floor.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I just want to make sure that my screen is showing. I don't seem to see it on my side. Can you just confirm if you can see my screen? Okay. Maybe just do this again, 1 second. The technology at times has its own mind. Are they showing now? Not now, okay. I'm trying to see. Can you see it in the slideshow mode? Perfect. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Program Director. I think my task is a very easy one, is just to give a very short summary of the engagement we had on the 2nd of November when we had the policy workshop. Of course, I won't be able to give a full summary of the engagements of the day. That was a three-hour event, and I have 3 minutes now to just summarize what happened. So I'll just touch very briefly on the background, and then just touch on the summary of the workshop key issues and the take-home message that came from the engagements of the day. Just to assist those ones who were not in the workshop recognized and acknowledged the fact that There are various initiatives on data policy that are taking place globally, that are taking place in the continent, and that are taking place nationally. And here in South Africa, when we had this workshop, the idea was to identify the key data policy issues within the South African context. In particular, we were there to look into the current policy areas that are either conducive or restrictive to effective and responsible data sharing and usage. And we also wanted to explore the presence or the absence of technologies that can assist in the effective and responsible data sharing. And here we're talking about the technologies like the blockchain technologies, the artificial intelligence, and many others. Just to get quickly into the summary, the issues that came into the discussion were around the data governance in the public service. In particular, aspects that related to the laws governing data across many departments. I'm not going to go through the details of the departments, but we are aware of a number of departments that are doing a lot of work in this particular space, and where to look at the various laws that sit there. In the public space, what came in as very strong priority areas are summarized on this slide around the data sharing in public service, aspects of data policy for the whole economy, aspects that relate to the cooperation and the coordination within the public service, privacy and protection, inclusion, and cybersecurity. Because again, once data falls in the wrong hands, we have to make sure that people's information is not compromised. We also look into the industry priorities. And without getting into details here, the aspects that were critical, that came very strong, were around embracing the open data, particularly looking into the public data for use by private sector. We look into the development of infrastructure and skills, and this is a theme that came very strong in this conference since it began. We also look into, from the industry priority point of view, the creation of a conducive environment for investment. Again, this is something that's very strong, and it came out in a number of themes in the conference that we are having now. The creation of a capable state that can deal decisively to address the ills such as the crime, corruption, inequality, and many others came as a strong aspect, again, to say, how do we then use the data policy from the industrial point of view to assist in those areas? The social compact to develop and the co-create policy came very strongly, and the support for innovation, entrepreneurship, and education outcomes came in as a very strong theme as well. There was also a discussion that touched on the implementation. And if you just summarize the aspects, is that Africa as a whole, we have had a number of good policies. The challenge is on the implementation. When we speak of data policy, what are the implementation issues? And the aspects that came in here in summary talk about identification of the different types of data and application of appropriate regulations for those different types of data. The POPI Act in South Africa, and many others. The movement towards the compliance and reporting in the appropriate format. The need to develop a systems approach, including how regulations in one area can affect other areas. And in areas where we have cross-border engagements, how do we then take advantage and collaborate under critical instruments created by the AU, for instance, the African Continental Free Trade Area? There's an aspect that I'm not going to touch now, and my colleagues, I think Anne and Chris, will touch on this as well in terms of how one learns from the others. And the whole idea here is to say, how do we then learn from the diverse stakeholders? How do we balance between the protection and the empowerment of business practices, the standards, collaboration, equitable and fair access to data? And similar, in a similar kind of context, you look into what other countries are doing under the C4IR network. I'm not going to go through the details of this. I think the colleagues from the World Economic Forum can talk more into this. But there's a whole lot of aspects that are taking place that talk to the very same point. So a key take-home message, in short, can be summarized as, for South Africa to go forward, we want to create a platform for multi-stakeholder collaboration to be used by all. We want to identify the current priorities for the country before finalizing the use cases. We need to facilitate for a clear definition of an open data in the country, understanding that as things stand, data is an asset for the growth of the economy. Providing general platform that can also drive collaboration with vertical sectors such as health and many others. And critically, to lead the creation of norms and standards for the cross-border flows. And this is something that I think has been touched as well. Krista spoke of this as well, and I think it's a critical aspect. So in short, we realize that we also need to work on the implementation mechanisms that will address the challenges in balancing the economic growth and the protection of citizen information. The need to ensure data policy framework that won't just increase the digital divide. And lastly, to ensure that there's a data policy landscape that is aligned with the use cases that can drive impact. So in short, Program Director, with the time that I'm given, I will pause here and I will engage with the questions at the later stage. Thank you very much.
I'm just astounded and pleasantly surprised about what you can achieve in a 3-hour session in unearthing, crystallizing issues. And obviously, we're nowhere close to resolving some of the complexity, but I think we really touched on key issues. And I would like to express my thanks to all the participants at the workshop. And if you were not at the workshop on last Monday, we definitely would like to further engage with you, and I hope you got a feel of what was touched on. We will make that presentation available. In fact, all the presentation currently at this webinar to all who registered and who attended the workshop. And certainly at the end of this session, we'll talk a little bit about how we then take the conversations forward. The journey continues. We need you as stakeholders to work with us to begin to tackle quite a lot of these issues. Then I move on to our next presentation, or rather input, by Ms. Julie Ziskind. And she's going to talk about how the multi-stakeholder approach can help South Africa to build a more engaged and more empowered digital citizenry. And Julie is known to you, those of you who were at the workshop. She's a data policy platform curator at the WEF Global 4IR. Julie, you've got the floor. And she's a friend of ours. She's a really, really good support to our center. Julie, you've got the floor.
Thank you so much, Khungeka. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm so glad to work with you on the center and getting all the data policy projects up and running. It's really been a pleasure. So I'm happy to be here. I think we've heard quite a bit about everything that's going on in the data space and the complexities and kind of all the issues that have been discussed. But what I'm going to touch upon is a little bit more on the how of the C4IR centers in general and the kind of forum philosophy on multi-stakeholder engagement. So I think when we look at these very complex issues, such as data policy, and you see so many different perspectives and so many lines of thought that need to be reflected, you say, you know, how is it possible to even start this discussion? And luckily for us, this is something that the forum has been preaching and doing for 50 years now. And what we believe is that it's extremely important to start building a multi-stakeholder and very diverse community around each of our projects and each piece of work as early as possible. And when we do this, we don't simply, you know, reach out to governments or to businesses and talk to them separately. No, for each piece of work, what we want to do is make sure that we have everybody who is affected, everyone who has a perspective in the room to give input starting from the beginning. And as we talked about, data policy is probably one of the most complex things out there. Pretty much every new technology that we're working with, from Internet of Things to artificial intelligence to the blockchain, everything depends on data. And unless we can figure out really how to work between the data subjects, the data aggregators, the platforms, the regulators, the companies that need this data in order to find insights and to have growth, the governments that need to understand their citizens. It's going to be very difficult to come up with both relevant and robust pieces of regulation. So what we're doing at the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution at the Forum, and with our affiliate network, which we're working very closely with and very happy to have with us, is building these communities that can input on these discussions and really bring a multifaceted view. So as my colleagues mentioned earlier, for example, when we talk about cross-border data flows, we start the conversation not only in Rwanda, but we bring in the partnership that we had with Bahrain. And we put those partners together in a conversation to really understand the different perspectives that they might not have had otherwise. For the work that we are doing, for example, on reimagining privacy and redesigning notice and consent, we don't just have the platform companies that are sending these notifications, or the data subjects that may or may not feel comfortable signing them, but we engage a wide group of NGOs who are passionate about protecting user privacy, and those that are interested in adapting certain legislation, and then academics that have been studying not only data as we see it today, but have been studying the history of how data has evolved, to bring in their perspective and to really make the guidelines and procedures that we propose dynamic and multifaceted. Therefore, everything that we publish actually starts much before the publication hits the press. It's through workshops and conversations that are carefully curated to make sure that all the different perspectives are reflected and also listened to by the different sides. Again, this might not be something that's necessary for each and every project concerning data. For example, we are very much conscious that within a certain company, some optimization processes may very well take place without the input of a government voice, or in certain departments of government, it's not necessary to bring in a small company and a large company and a corporation to see how they can optimize a certain service. But at the level that we're trying to address with the center's work, at the very high not only theoretical, but also practical level that requires all of these inputs, we do have to have the broadest possible discussion. And so when we form these communities, what we really try to do is, one, to avoid duplicating any other efforts. We don't want to recreate the wheel in any way. We want to bring in the voices that have already done important and passionate work in these domains, and actually hear from what they have learned and pass on those learnings to those that may just be working in a separate sector, or have different assumptions, or have a different understanding of what certain implications may look like in the long term. So this is a little bit of the how behind the important work that is being done, and also how we try to work with these communities and create key partnerships, not only for the immediate deliverables, but also for the long-term implementation pilots that we do through our centers, and also the various special communities that we engage with, which includes the affiliate network, of course, with Rwanda and South Africa in Africa, but we also have a center in Norway that is focused only on oceans. We have centers in Brazil and Colombia, in Turkey, in the UAE, in Israel and Saudi Arabia. We have government partnerships with Finland, as my colleague Anne mentioned, in Singapore, Bahrain, and Canada. So we really try to pull in as much of a diverse perspective as possible. We also work very closely with certain communities at the forum, such as the Technology Pioneers, which are a group of cutting-edge technology startups where we work with their founders, with the Global Innovators, which are more later stage companies in new technology that are unicorn or, I mean, close to becoming unicorns. We work with the Data for Common Purpose community, as my colleagues mentioned as well, which are looking at how do you think about data from the purpose perspective rather than only from the provenance, and basically build out these very deep and engaging conversations that will take our work forward. So I think I'll stop there, and also very happy to take questions and share more. And thank you, Khungeka, again for having me.
We actually are running a little out of time, and I just want to squeeze in Chris to say a few words on what is the greatest opportunity for bringing together diverse perspectives around data. In fact, his question is his input I'm requesting him to make. In a way, talks to the question that has been posed just now, which I'll read out, but hopefully it answers part of that. Chris, you've got the floor. Be mindful that we're just on the edge of our time limit. I can see that the next session is already presenting itself here. So you've got the floor, Chris. Chris is actually the Government Affairs Lead at the WEF Global Center for Fourth Industrial Revolution. And Chris actually is actively working with us at the South Africa C4IR Center, the center in the C4IR South Africa, as we're establishing the center. So Chris, you've got the floor.
Great, thank you very much, and it's such a pleasure to work with you at the center. Where's the greatest opportunity? You've heard before in the presentation that data policy is a very complex landscape, and that there are many actors that are involved. Often what we see is that the private sector is pushing towards more openness of data, because that really enables to harness the potential of data for economic opportunities. On the other hand, we see that other stakeholders really look at the data privacy and protecting the individuals that are providing their data to enable these economic opportunities. And where we see the greatest opportunity for the center to move progress is where we can find that right balance, and where we can combine the actors that are really eager to work together, because there is such a strong common purpose that it makes sense for all parties to join forces and to move forward. Just in the interest of time, I want to share one example of our work in India, where the government saw the future as agriculture at great risk because of COVID. Movement of farmers was restricted, and the supply chain was interrupted. And there was an understanding that technologies could be a great of great benefit to increase yield from crops and to better detect when weather adversaries, for example, could impact crop yield. Of course, there are many different actors that see this as an opportunity, the people providing fertilizer, for example, but where the government is also eager to make sure that the individual small-scale farmers can benefit from the data that is used by analyzing their crops. So there is a complex landscape of all actors that are really motivated to work together in using data for better agriculture. And that's why it's such a fertile ground for us to work, and why our center in India is working on the topic of agriculture. Similarly, in other areas, for example, in Japan, we are working with the healthcare sector, because governments really want to anticipate the effects of a population getting older. Of course, for pharmaceutical companies, it provides a great economic opportunity as well. So you have actors that want to work together to provide a right and ethical data landscape and a data policy. So using those finding those use cases that are very important for an economy to to make progress and to pilot and new data policy frameworks is key in making progress. And this is what we will work on in the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in South Africa, to find that use case that is most relevant in terms of economic and social impact in South Africa, and see that as a way forward. Industries that have already been mentioned in previous discussions are, for example, working with the mining industry, because it's such an important jobs provider in South Africa. Of course, the whole dealing with the COVID aftermath is a very important area we can focus on. And we will discuss with local stakeholders further how and where we can focus our attention to provide the greatest benefit for the center. In the interest of time, let me pause here now and return back to you, Khungeka.
You've also highlighted this approach of use cases on picking a sector and looking at the specific issues, not throughout the sector necessarily, but specifically on the pain points in that particular sector, and addressing those issues and bringing about governance solutions as the center aims to do. So thanks, Chris, for that sharing. Indeed, from the last workshop, there was suggestions that one of the key focus for the center could be to pick one or two use cases and work on those as a way, again, to begin to relieve the pain points in particular sectors. Mining is a possibility. Chris spoke about agriculture. Health is another area. Colleagues, that takes us to the end of formal inputs by our speakers today. We have received one question. I'm just going to squeeze it in before we, and I'm going to ask if any of our speakers want to just address it. As I said, the question is very related to the topic that we gave Chris. But I think particularly Julie and Chris and Anne and Anne, I'm not sure if Crystal is still here, in having looked at these issues on data policies, and naturally with multiple stakeholders participating and with different interests. This is the essence of this question. How do you reconcile that? So let me read the question as put. It says data policy and C4IR technology for good can mean, one, for industry, use the data to get as high profit margin in its operational and business dealings. Secondly, for government and policymakers, it can mean A, efficient use of scarce resources. B, economically empower and digitally include undeserved communities. C, protection of natural environment and protection of the natural environment. And the question is, how do we merge these opposite requirements and enact a data policy that balances all of these interests? I don't know if any of the speakers want to quickly come in and maybe give an input. Also would like to recommend that we also, if there's any other questions, because we don't have enough time, we will then send answers to those questions. We don't have all the answers. That's the other thing to emphasize. I think our processes we follow would also bring about answers. And secondly, also the principle should always be to bring multi-stakeholders around the table. And naturally, they come for different reasons around the table. And I think the process that is typically run in a center, in these C4IR centers, is about reconciling and finding common ground and addressing the issues that are common to stakeholders. Chris, Julie, I don't know if Crystal is here, and do you have any quick thoughts around this question that's being asked about how do you reconcile the different interests of stakeholders sitting around the table and coming in from different sides, so to speak, and have different intentions.
I think the premise of the question is absolutely correct in the sense that everybody is going to have different interests. That's just the way of the world. And that's not a new problem. That's something that governments have always struggled with in terms of creating laws that are appropriate, and they don't always get it right. And usually they use a better regulation model whereby they look for evidence of harm, consult with different stakeholders, and then decide what to do. We take a slightly different approach in the sense that our mandate only comes from the stakeholders. The World Economic Forum is not government. The centers are obviously government sponsored, but in that sense, the problems that we're looking at, that really is surfaced by the different members of the community. So the stakeholders agree amongst themselves, this is a problem. They'll all have a slightly different interest and a slightly different perspective on how to solve that. But what we'd say is that good policy making finds a balance. It finds a way through to reflect all of those different interests. And I think there's really a really big opportunity. I alluded to it earlier on around empowering what positive steps can be taken forward. So there's such an emphasis on punitive measures, but if we can get us to a place where if everybody agrees that this is the right way forward, what supports need to be put in place, that can be everything from government regulation to internal codes of conduct in companies, and in terms of how they decide to do things, in terms of advocacy and civil rights groups having their say as well. So good policy making should reflect all of these interests, but collectively should agree the way forward.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you for that, and thank you to all the speakers today, and thank you to the team from the C4IR South Africa for pulling together what came out of the last week's workshop. We will be building up a documentation of what is coming out of these interactions, and sooner than later we'll be loading these on our website. But for those who are participating today, we'll ensure that we share what the essence of what came out of today in addition to what came out at the last workshop. Just in terms of wrap-up, I just want to indicate that the center, the South African Center, is now moving into beginning to mobilize a formal partnership and launching projects, and data policy will be one of those projects. And there are other one or two projects that we're exploring. In fact, there's one project on IoT and SMMEs that is a global project, and we intend to pilot that project in South Africa, and we're engaging stakeholders. We have outlined the ways in which any of the stakeholders and yourselves can partner with the center. We've got three types of partners. One is what we call Tier 1 core members, and we'll send you the detail around what that means. And then we've got Tier 2 project partners. In fact, around data policy, we'll likely be engaging project partners, because we need, this would essentially crystallize itself into a project that you can roll out. And then thirdly, we've got knowledge partners, academia, civil society, small businesses, and again, these are key parties to help to shape and evolve the solutions that the center seeks to achieve. So in terms of our next steps from here, the key principles and considerations to guide our way forward is that we'll be issuing, by the way, an expression of interest to stakeholders in public sector. We want to make it open. We have met organizations and individuals who have expressed interest to work with us. For obvious reasons, I think there's a huge value proposition to all stakeholders by the center and being affiliated with WEF, Global 4IR Network. And so we will, but nevertheless, we still want to open up invitation. So there'll be an expression of interest to stakeholders in public sector, private sector, civil society, and academia. And the objective is first to invite Tier 1 partners, and again, we'll send you this detailed information. And these are core members of the center, and they will participate in all the projects we launch. We will also be inviting experts to participate in some of the WEF global councils in any of the preliminary focus areas. And we're already starting to identify those, so those opportunities. And then we've got tier 2 partners, which are project partners. That's what the expression of interest will also target, but specifically in this case, around data policy. We'll communicate further. I can see that my colleagues who are gonna be taking over the next session are already here. I want to thank you very much, and I wish I had an audience to clap, but thank you. We will be in communication, and hopefully next time we meet, there will be no COVID, and there'll be extreme interaction, and you'll be really taking this conversation to the next level. Thank you.